Tuva, or Teva, officially the Tuvan Republic, is a federal subject of Russia, a republic also defined in the Constitution of the Russian Federation as a state. The Tuvan Republic lies at the geographical center of Asia in southern Siberia. The republic borders the Altai Republic, the Republic of Khakassia-Irkutsk region, and the Republic of Buryatia in Russia and Mongolia to the south. The region is also claimed by the Taiwanese major political party Kuomintang as part of the Republic of China. There was a very interesting discovery there. First, a little bit of history. Immigrants from northern China appeared in Tuva during the era of the Great Migration of Peoples. This is evidenced by a new archaeological monument of this period discovered in the flooding zone of the Sacsayhuamán hydroelectric power station by the Tuva archaeological expedition of the Institute of the History of Material Culture of the Russian Academy of Sciences. The monument became one of the most significant discoveries of the expedition in 2016, and its research has continued since then. It's a great discovery, and numerous archaeological sites have been discovered along the banks of the Yenisei River, according to the head of the expedition, Marina Kulisnovska, a senior researcher at the Department of Archaeology of the Central Asia and the Caucasus of the Russian Academy of Sciences. The most interesting is the Altai burial ground, where 10 burials of the Huns were excavated, and nomadic people who lived in the steppes north of China in the 1st century BC to the 2nd century AD. This monument is a very important discovery, indicating that at the beginning of the era of the Great Migration of Peoples, a group of newcomers appeared in the territory of Tuva, apparently originating from northern China, and from this moment on, the formation of the Turkic ethnic groups began. Excavation in these areas began in 1965, during the construction of the Sacsayhuamán hydroelectric power station. Thousands of cultural monuments were flooded, starting from the Paleolithic era, the Stone Age, and up to the late Middle Ages. So we do not know what other historical features are hidden from us, and those who follow the research about the Akutia cauldrons and the ancient aliens of Akutia know that the same situation took place in Akutia, where because of these artifacts at the site, such as the cauldrons, were flooded, and we know where they are, but they're covered by tons of water. An object was found in the Altai burial ground in Tuva, which the archaeologists themselves dubbed or called a smartphone. It looks very much like a modern gadget. It's a flat rectangle decorated with turquoise, carnelian, and mother-of-pearls. Scientists believe that this is a belt buckle and believe that its age is more than 2,100 years, and much more. It's not known what this artifact was, but it was clearly created with the help of some technological tools, and pay attention to its smooth edges and the neat holes. Perhaps the nomads of the Huns simply found a certain product left over from more ancient civilizations that existed in the territory of Siberia. This stylish accessory has already been jokingly dubbed the ancient iPhone, and its owner was named Natasha. Details of the archaeological discovery were given in a scientific article by Marina Kulisnovskaya and Pablo Lios, employees of the Institute of the History of Material Culture of the Russian Academy of Sciences, as follows from the material. The discovery was made back in 2016, but a detailed description of the artifacts found has become available to the general public very recently. The necropolis in Tuva was erected by representatives of the ancient nomadic people of Xiunan, who inhabited the steppes to the north of China from the 3rd century BC to the 2nd century AD. We're given a different period now and a different name. It was to protect against their aids that the Chinese Emperor Qin Shi Huangdi ordered the construction of fortifications known today as the Great Wall of China. The Xiunan were a tribal confederation of nomadic peoples who, according to ancient Chinese sources, inhabited the eastern Eurasian steppe from the 3rd century BC to the late 1st century AD. Chinese sources report that Modo Chanyu, the supreme leader, after 209 BC, founded the Xiunan Empire. The identity of the ethnic core of Xiunan has been the subject of different hypotheses because only a few words Mainly titles and personal names were preserved in the Chinese sources. The name Xiunan may be the same as the Huns, although this is disputed by some scientists. The Hun state was at war with China throughout its short history, eventually disintegrating as a result of this conflict as well as internal strife. The area of settlement of the warlike nomads covered, among other things, the lands of modern Russia. About 110 graves were discovered by archaeologists on the island that temporarily comes out from the water when the waters become low. They were incredibly lucky to find the graves of rich nomads who were not affected by any actions of ancient tomb robbers, according to Kila Novatskaya. Scientists were able to determine the approximate age of the burial of Natasha thanks to some Chinese coins that once decorated the belt of the woman. They were minted 2,137 years ago, a massive black rectangular object similar to the iPhone, which turned out to be a buckle for this belt. According to archaeologists, the excavation of the graves at Alatay Necropolis will continue, and only after all the studies are completed, specialists will be able to give an accurate description of people's lives and their social differences in ancient society. One question does not give scientists any rest at the moment. If man's burials are based on the accompanying object, they would suggest they were quite poor, but for some reason, women are noticeably richer. So in the graves of men, they usually did not put other things except for ceramic vessels, iron knives, and other everyday objects. In the graves of Alatay were invariably located in the waist area. This indicates that this element was part of the funeral attire. During excavations in other Xiunan necropolis, for example, in Trans-Baikal or northern China, similar buckles were found at the feet or next to the buried person. The belt with a massive buckle, most likely an element of a woman's dress, which could initially be used as a wedding dress, was later worn on special solemn events, and departure to the afterlife, of course, is one of these. Buckles made of black amber were not as strong than similar products made of bronze or bone. Frequent exploitation made them unusual, as evidenced by the finds of fragments of such buckles during the excavation of this young new hill. In these places, archaeologists also found graves belonging to other eras, from the Bronze Age to Genghis Khan. Earlier, two partially mummified ancient fashionistas were discovered buried together with the items. They treated one of them, calling it Sleeping Beauty, who was originally considered a priestess, but in fact turned out to be a specialist in working with leather products. The second, in prehistoric times, worked as a weaver. Burials with bronze buckles, or as they are called, open-work plates, are of great interest. They're all unique. There are only a few dozen such bronze buckles around the world. In 2018, they found two small buckles which apparently were used to decorate shoes. There is a series of buckles with geometric patterns, and at the very end of the lines of the geometric pattern, the heads of horses or snakes are depicted. During the next excavations, archaeologists were attracted by an unusual find. Next to the ancient skeleton was an object of rectangular shape. During the excavations, an unusual accessory was found in a burial dating back to the Xiunan era, which has not yet met with analogues. According to Marina Kilonovskaya, the age of the find is approximately 2100 BC. But if it was made in China at the time, it was ruled by the Xia dynasty, which lasted from 2100 BC to 1600 BC, and at that period they used stone tools like the hand axe. They also made use of fire and perfecting the stone tools that they created. Archaeology was improved during the Xia period, and pasturing was started along with irrigation technology that was greatly improved. The production of dried and earthen goods also took place. The use of ships and vehicles arose, and the use of varnish became commonplace. Silk production and weaving also took place during the Xia dynasty, as well as drilling and carving technology. But the most recognizable innovation during this period was the creation of the calendar, based on two different patterns. The use of jade bronze vessels and bronze casting became popular at that time. If this dates back to 2137 BC, then we need to remember this was a day of a memorable celestial event when the official Chinese records reported that the sun and the moon could not live peacefully together in the sky. and it was just the first total solar eclipse that made it into the history books. In fact, one scholar tracked down records of 916 solar eclipses between 2137 BC and 1785 AD in Chinese literature. Of course, it's only the year. We don't know if there's any connection when the iPhone buckle or whatever the object was made of. We just don't know that. Let's go back to Tuva. One point where the Tuva expedition worked in 2016 and planned to continue, but we don't have too many updates, almost none about their findings so far. It was the territories bordering with Mongolia in the south of Tuva and the Opsinor Basin, and in Mongolia. The research was carried out here jointly with the Institute of Archaeology of Mongolia. During the study of the rock art monuments of Ura from 12 to 18 carat Takan, and two located here at the expedition, found several hundred new drawings reproducing scenes of processions of animals, hunting, battles, chariots, houses, figures of gods, deer, predators of different historical eras, Karik-Sua, a mound resembling a wheel with spokes in design, and a ritual burial of the Bronze Age. They also discovered the 2nd millennium BC bones of red deer and bull. Since ancient times, a path connecting Tuva and Mongolia has passed through the Mongon Sakir Gorge, along with the Amasana himself, who was a hero of the people's resistance of the 18th century past. Did George Van Tassel build a structure in California that could slow down the aging process based on instructions given to him by extraterrestrials? And was he killed before he had a chance to fully finish this facility and share it with the world? According to some researchers, that is a strong possibility. Although he spent the vast majority of his life in California, George Van Tassel was born in Jefferson, Ohio, where he spent the first 2 decades of his life. After dropping out of high school while only a young teacher, he obtained a private pilot's license. By the time he was 20, he'd moved west to California, where he would find work with Howard Hughes, with whom he struck up a close friendship. There is little doubt that for all his skill and intelligence, Van Tassel was an eccentric, and very much had a spiritual side to him. It was during his early years in California when he met another eccentric person, Franz Kritzer. Kritzer was an entrepreneur of sorts who had developed a mining operation at Giant Rock in Landers, and also converted nearby land into a private airstrip. In fact, Kritzer lived in several rooms he had carved himself underneath Giant Rock near the mines. It was here where Van Tassel began spending an increasing amount of time, undoubtedly learning whatever he could from Kritzer. In 1942, however, with the United States having recently encountered the Second World War, Kritzer received orders from local authorities to register himself as available for the military draft. Rumors had been circulating for some time, most likely incorrectly, that Kritzer was a German spy. And when law enforcement arrived to give him a friendly ride to the draft office, the culmination of that meeting did little to quash such talk. Kritzer emerged from his settlement under Giant Rock with dynamite around his neck and a wire in each hand. He stated that he wasn't going to the draft, and with that, he touched the wires together and blew himself up, killing himself instantly. At least that is the official version. Reports would circulate afterwards that the explosion was the result of an FBI raid that had not gone according to plan, and that a tear gas canister had ignited dynamite stored near the entrance where Kritzer was standing. Whatever the truth of the matter, a short time after his friend's death, Van Tassel bought the land once owned by Kritzer, and after building a small house near Giant Rock, moved his family to their new home. Van Tassel, though, would spend considerable time in the hollowed-out room under Giant Rock. Then in 1953, Van Tassel's life changed forever. He would claim that he was awoken in the middle of the night by extraterrestrials who declared that they were from Venus. They would invite him aboard their spaceship, where they would share information with him concerning the re-energizing and rejuvenation of the human body. Ultimately, they offered the secrets to reversing aging and possibly achieving immortality. However, in order to achieve this, he he would have to construct a very specific building, a facility called an Integraton. By now, Van Tassel had attracted a relatively large number of followers, plenty of whom were happy to help fund his project. By 1954, the construction of the Integraton was underway. Van Tassel would describe his structure at the time being as a time machine for basic research on rejuvenation, anti-gravity, and time travel. The building itself had a domed roof made entirely of wood. However, around the outside of this was metal apparatus that would rotate and was made from non-ferromagnetic materials. It was Van Tassel's belief that a high-voltage electrostatic generator would supply a broad range of frequencies to recharge cellular structures. This would, he proposed, reverse the aging process. He would offer in one interview that the problem with human life on Earth was that when a person finally becomes smart enough to do something with the knowledge they have acquired, they are old and heading towards death. Ultimately, the human lifespan is just too short. He would also often quote the line from the Bible which stated that the last enemy to be destroyed is death. There were certainly plenty of people who also believed in the project, and funding continued to come Van Tassel's way over the years that followed. And while Van Tassel was far from viewed as being a cult leader by the media, he was not without his critics, all of whom would offer well-thought-out responses, offering on one occasion that science itself continues to disprove its own theories. Ultimately, after almost 25 years in early 1978, Van Tassel would state that the Integraton was almost complete and fully functional, and that he would appear in a television interview to update everyone on these final technological steps. It was while preparing for this interview on February the 9th that Van Tassel suffered a sudden and fatal heart attack in his hotel in Santa Ana, California. He'd only recently been given a clean bill of health and was only 67 years old. If there wasn't any reason to suspect foul play initially, the fact that Van Tassel's home was ransacked in the hours following his death, with several boxes of papers and notes removed, as well as the symptomatic stripping of the Integraton itself of various tools and devices, there perhaps was in the days that followed. Incidentally, none of these papers or devices has ever been seen since. Even more suspicious, Van Tassel's body had been cremated before members of his family had even been told of his death. So, what should we make of this intriguingly but seemingly outrageous account? Perhaps one of the first things we should note about the account of George Van Tassel and the instructions he claimed to have received from extraterrestrials in order to build the Integraton is how similar they are to many biblical accounts that some researchers claim show interaction between humanity and alien entities in the distant past. Such stories as Noah receiving instructions to build the ark, for example, or Moses receiving similar instructions to construct the Ark of the Covenant. We might also consider the notion that if alien beings did indeed manipulate our DNA thousands of years in the past, part of the reason for doing so was to shorten the human lifespan. There are, at least according to some researchers, many reasons to think that the human lifespan should be much greater than it is. If we look at the Bible once more, we can see many characters that have lifespans of 800 to 900 years. Or if we examine the Sumerian king list, we can see rulers who supposedly ruled for thousands of years. It has been put forward by some that following the flood, the human lifespan was drastically and intentionally shortened. If there is any truth to that, perhaps Van Tassel was correct in his belief that manipulating human DNA could lengthen this lifespan. We should note that, despite it being decisively stripped back of Van Tassel's original concept and design, those who have entered the facility in the years since his death claim that they have felt a definite positive change within their bodies. We can only guess how much more positive and noticeable this change might have been had the same people experienced the Integraton as Van Tassel had envisioned and intended. Did George Van Tassel construct a building that could slow down? Perhaps even reverse the aging process in human beings? And did he meet an untimely end because of this life-changing invention, one he claimed was given to him by intelligent extraterrestrials? If so, Where is this technology and know-how today? It is being stored away in an attempt to thwart human efforts to live much longer, healthier lives than even the luckiest of us do today. Or might it be in the hands of a very select few who might be looking to use such technology for themselves and an exclusive club of hand-picked others? As preposterous as it might sound, several individuals could come and go in positions of power over several hundred years, and with the technical ability to slow down and even reverse the aging process, they could be the same person undetected by multiple generations. Indeed, while it is easy to dismiss Van Tassel's claims as the ravings of an eccentric, if captivating individual, the fact that his work was seemingly stolen from under his family's nose only hours after his death, a death viewed by many as, at the very least, a little eyebrow-raising, suggests there could be a lot more to his work and more validity to his theories than many might think. Throughout time, there have been many intriguing time travel stories. One of the most puzzling accounts deals with a very brilliant Egyptologist, Joseph Bonomi, and a mysterious inventor named Samuel Alfred Warner. Between them, it is rumored they designed and built a real time machine based on secret ancient Egyptian knowledge. Hiding deep within the grounds and shrouded by trees stands a foreboding mausoleum, an imposing 20-foot tall with a pyramid roof. It's made from granite with a solid, heavy bronze door secured by a keyhole. Decorative accents line the door, furthering the air of mystery. The door's margin displays a rectangular strip of Egyptian hieroglyphs. Built in the early 1850s, it was intended as the final resting place of a woman named Hannah Courtoy and two of her three daughters, Mary and Elizabeth. Very little is known about Hannah Courtoy or about her three daughters, Elizabeth and Mary Ann, but for the last 150 years, they've been at eternal rest in a mausoleum at Brompton Cemetery, West London. During her lifetime, she'd amassed a fortune. Some said she'd been the mistress of kings, politicians, and rich, powerful men. No one knows who fathered her two daughters, but they died soon after their mother, and nobody knows how they died. More mysterious still is the mausoleum, standing 20 feet tall in the middle of Brompton Cemetery, and rumored to be a time machine. It is rumored that Bonomi designed Hannah's mausoleum, a theory given some credence by its pyramid-shaped peak and by the mysterious hieroglyphics inscribed on the walls of the tomb and on Bonomi's own headstone. The Victorians were fascinated with the idea of time travel, and some believed the pharaohs had discovered its secrets. Might Bonomi have learned the time travel trick during one of his expeditions to the pyramids? Gently opening the old iron gate of Brompton Cemetery is somewhat similar to breaking the spine of a book containing some secret London history. Well-known suffragist Emmeline Pankhurst was laid to rest here. Beatrix Potter also walked its many plots of land and penned names from gravestones to use in her work, these including decedents Peter Rabbit and Mr. Nutkins. In excess of 35,000 landmarks in all are available, rich and poor, known and forgotten. Hannah Courtoy's tomb would be impressive for its imposing stature and cryptic veneer alone. It's the largest, most elaborate construction in all of Brompton Cemetery. But there's more to this story, much more. That it's secretly a time machine. London musician and Courtoy historian Stephen Coates, the man behind some of the recent bizarre claims, states it's not a time machine, it's a teleportation chamber. In order to try and interpret the bizarre urban legend that's been constructed around Courtoy's tomb, it helps to understand the complex and secretive life of the woman who ordered its construction. Born around 1784, Hannah Peters fled an abusive father at a young age and found work as a housekeeper and as a tavern employee. In 1800, a friend introduced her to John Courtoy, a 70-year-old former wig maker in poor health who had made a fortune in the early banking business. Peters was shortly in his employ as a housekeeper. Within the year, she had given birth to the first of 3 daughters. She claimed they were indeed Courtoy's despite his age, although some suspected and made it known they believed that the friend who made the introduction, Francis Grosso, might have been the real father. John Courtoy's illness is also ill-defined in historical accounts. Although it was rumoured he had a violent run-in with a street worker in 1795 that left Courtoy, who had been attacked with a knife, reserved and antisocial. He fell in love with a young Hannah, who took his name and had considerable influence over many of his decisions. Courtoy's 1810 will, which initially left most of his fortune to an ex-wife named Mary Ann Woolley and their 5 children, was changed in 1814, so Hannah received the majority of his wealth. Like many Victorians of the time, Hannah was intrigued by Egyptian iconography, particularly hieroglyphics. She believed the Egyptians had a deep understanding of astrology and of their place in the universe, and she invited Egyptologist Joseph Bonamy over to her home for regular visits. Bonamy and Hannah would spend hours discussing Egyptian lore, with Hannah hoping to one day fund Bonamy's expeditions to Egypt so he could further their studies. When Hannah passed away in 1849, she was laid to rest in an expensive, elaborately designed mausoleum in Brompton that paid tribute to her interests. Bonamy arranged for the tomb to feature Egyptian characters and a pyramidal top. Later, Mary and Elizabeth, who never married for fear of losing their wealth to untrustworthy men, joined her. Susanna, her 3rd daughter who married, was buried elsewhere. When Bonamy died in 1878, he arranged for a depiction of Courtoy's tomb to appear on his own modest headstone. Whether Bonamy intended it or not, an illustration of Anubis, the Egyptian god of the dead, appears to be looking in the direction of his friend's final resting place. Things appeared to be normal at Brompton for the next 100 years or so. Then, around 1980, the key to the tomb was lost following a visit by Hannah's relatives, and that's when things took a turn for the weird. It was reporter Helen Smith who unsuspectingly wrote an article in 1998. That article may have been the first mainstream story to raise the theory that Courtoy's tomb might actually be a time machine. She described the monument as a strange, imposing structure containing 3 spinsters about whom almost nothing is known, and cited an unheralded author named Howard Webster as perpetrator of the story. Webster claimed his research had excavated a connection between Bonamy and Samuel Alfred Warner, a maverick Victorian genius and fraudster said to have attempted to interest the British Armed Forces in several advanced weapons, too advanced, in fact, to actually exist. Webster thought that Warner's inventive genius may have led him to team up with Bonamy, who supposedly had knowledge of the Egyptian theories of time travel. Together, the two persuaded the wealthy, trusting Hannah to finance their secret project, with Bonamy providing ancient wisdom and Warner adding his breakthrough scientific resources. By strategically placing their device in a cemetery, Warner could guarantee the structure was unlikely to be disturbed over decades or centuries, allowing him to return to London after travelling through time again and again. The fact that the key was missing was pivotal to Webster's tale. Since it had been lost and no one had opened the mausoleum for years, could it be perhaps that Warner was busying himself in a manner similar to an occupant of the TARDIS, travelling from era to era, while Hannah and her family were either entombed or buried someplace else entirely? Webster also claimed that the blueprints for the tomb were missing, which was very unusual for monuments in Brompton. The story slowly gathered momentum over the years. In 2003, an album cover by musician Drew Mulholland illustrated Hannah's tomb and its mysterious construction. This too helped pique the public's interest. In 2011, Coates, a musician with a band named The Real Tuesday Weld, read about Hannah's alleged time machine and became intrigued. He wrote an article on his blog postulating that the Courtoy tomb was not a means of time travel, but that Warner had the technology to teleport torpedoes, and that he later adopted the framework to develop a series of teleportation chambers in and around the Magnificent Seven, a group of London's historic private cemeteries. It was a way to move around the city, Coates says. Warner and Bonamy worked together on an ancient Egyptian occult theory and science. I posted that on my blog and it started to take on a life of its own, he said. Coates' premise is a proper study in how an urban legend can proliferate. With the key still missing, it was impossible to disprove the teleportation idea with any real precision, and the mythology allowed for a great deal of speculation. Why did the tomb take 4 years to complete following Hannah's death, which meant she didn't actually enter it until 1853? Was Hannah fooled by the two to fund what she believed would be a time machine? It can be difficult to corner Coates for a precise answer on whether he believes his fanciful hypothesis about the resting place of Hannah Courtoy. When initially contacted by the Floss online magazine for an interview, he agreed while mentioning that he came up with the whole teleportation system idea as the background to a short story. In conversation, he presents the teleportation springboard as a way for people to make up their own mind about what the tomb might contain. A breath or two later, he expresses doubt that Hannah's daughters might still be entombed there, before wondering whether the mausoleum might be home to a secret subterranean chamber. It's all alternative theory based on historical fact, he says. Opening it may not establish it's not a time machine, Coates hedges. It may just deepen the mystery. For many, the tomb is a slab of rock. The real magic is in their minds. In the 1820s, England medical doctor and paleontologist Gideon Mantell discovered some of the first dinosaur fossils ever recorded, but inside the millions of years old deposits of chalk and flint, he also claimed to have discovered coins and other antiquities. Is his account to be trusted? If so, how did they get there? Gideon Mantell and dinosaur fossils. Physician, geologist and paleontologist Gideon Mantell was born in Sussex, England on the 3rd of February 1790, the son of a shoemaker. Mantell studied medicine in London, but in 1811 returned to Sussex where he became a successful surgeon. But from an early age his passion had been geology, and he developed an interest and passion for the various types of fossils that could be found in the chalk quarries in the countryside near his home. He practiced from his house in Castle Place and at the same time made significant discoveries in the field and began to build up a collection of what became known as his Mantellian Museum. When he started digging fossils, all the known fossils assemblages from Cretaceous England, a geological period that lasted from about 145 to 66 million years ago, were marine. But Mantell discovered remains of terrestrial and freshwater ecosystems that he named the strata of the Tilgate Forest. As early as 1820, he had begun to find bones of gigantic animals, and at that time also discovered a strange fossilized tooth, unlike anything he'd ever seen before, but perhaps belonging to a huge herbivore. One day the animal associated with this unusual odd tooth would prove to be among his greatest contributions to science. But at first, the scientific community rejected his ideas about being from an unknown species. French zoologist and statesman Georges Cuvier, who established the science of comparative anatomy and paleontology, thought it belonged to a rhinoceros. Although the great Cuvier's dismissal was difficult to accept for Mantell, he persisted and sent Cuvier more teeth, eventually persuading him to reconsider his earlier decision. Cuvier wrote Mantell a letter confirming his support of his idea, which Mantell proudly presented at the Geological Society's next meetings. In the words of Mantell's biographer, Dennis Dean, "What a pleasure it must have been for him to confront his former critics who, more than 2 years earlier, had sneered at his epoch-making fossils, and, rather openly, at himself, the non-university son of an unlettered shoemaker." Now all that was changed, for Gideon had done more than win Cuvier's sanction or approval. Almost single-handedly, and despite the virtual unanimous disapproval of his most esteemed colleagues, he had persuaded the French authority to change his mind, yet so graciously that Cuvier had willingly recanted in public. The fossil teeth belonged to an animal that Mantell called the Iguanodon, which he realized was an extinct, colossal, herbivorous reptile, and until his discovery completely unknown to science. However, it was not until 1842 that it was first recognized as a new type of animal, a dinosaur. It was reconstructed in a life-size model together with models of other dinosaurs in the grounds of the Crystal Palace in South London in 1854. The Crystal Palace was a cast-iron and plate glass structure originally built in Hyde Park, London, to house the Great Exhibition of 1851. In 1833, Mantell moved his family to Brighton, where his medical practice failed to such a degree that the town council allowed him to turn his big house into a public museum showcasing his extraordinary discoveries. Admission cost £1, in those days around half a day's wages for a labourer or servant. Algernon Mantell wrote many books throughout his life and was a respected member of the Geological Society of London, of which he became vice president in 1848. In 1835, he was awarded its highest honour, the Wollaston Medal, the only person in its history to receive it. Mantell was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society in 1825 and received a Royal Medal in 1849. Mantell also kept a regular journal from 1818 until the days before his death in 1852. Half of this journal has been published, whilst the remaining is available in typed transcripts. Mantell's first and most important book, published in 1822, was The Fossils of the South Downs, or Illustrations of the Geology of Sussex. This work is now known mainly for the large number of fossils, almost all of which were invertebrates, from the Cretaceous and Tertiary strata, but particularly from the chalk that Mantell described and illustrated. A great number were new species, named by him and now familiar to paleontologists all over the world. Out-of-place artifacts. In The Fossils of the South Downs, Mantell makes an extraordinary statement about finding man-made artifacts in ancient flint nodules found in the chalk deposit, as well as similarly extraordinary finds from elsewhere. He says, "I cannot refrain from mentioning in this place the extraordinary circumstances of coins and other antiquities having been found enclosed in them." Mr. Knight Spencer, in a letter published in Bakewell's Introduction to Geology, relates the following interesting story. In 1791, 200 yards north of the ramparts of Hamburg, in a sandy soil, M. Leisky of the city picked up a flint and, knocking it against another, broke it in two. In the center of the fracture, he observed an ancient brass pin, and on picking up the other half, he found the corresponding mold of the pin so laid bare. Mantell goes on to quote another example of the discovery of man-made objects where they should not have been, this time taken from an issue of the Gentleman's Magazine from the 1700s, where mention was made of an ancient brass key having been found in a block of chalk at Guildford in Surrey. What can possibly be the explanation for these extraordinary finds? The presence of such coins and other man-made artifacts embedded in what appear to be rock laid down millions of years ago has suggested to some people that there's a problem with the way in which archaeological dating is carried out. The subject of artifacts found in contexts that are way out of sync with the accepted chronology of human history, known as out-of-place artifacts, has always been a controversial one. Some researchers insist that at various times in prehistory we have reached a high level of civilization, only for it to be subsequently destroyed without a trace by natural or man-made catastrophes. These out-of-place artifacts are apparently the evidence for advanced civilizations existing in remote antiquity. However, all is not as it seems, at least with Mantell's examples. As regards his own finds inside the flint nodules, he adds in his book that it may be considered as decisive of the comparatively recent formation of flint in certain situations. Of the find mentioned in the Gentleman's Magazine, he says that inquiries into the account proved it to be too apocryphal to be worthy of credit. Mantell returns to the subject of such apparently out-of-place artifacts in an article entitled On the Remains of Man and Works of Art Embedded in Rocks and Strata, published in the Archaeological Journal, Volume 7 in 1850. In this work, he states a number of examples of ancient man-made objects being encased in rock, and says that they could all be explained by natural geological processes. In one example, which he quotes, he says, "During my early attempts to investigate the geological structure of the southeast of England, I one day received a note from a Southdown farmer informing me of the discovery of a large iron nail in the center of a flint which he had accidentally broken. I immediately rode a distance of some 20 miles to inspect this wonderful curiosity, and was not a little surprised to find my correspondent's statement apparently borne out, for he placed in my hands a large rolled stone closely resembling externally the usual flint boulders of the ploughed lands of chalk districts, and which had been split down the middle. On one side was embedded a large iron nail, and deeply impressed on the opposite surface the corresponding mould. A slight inspection detected the nature of this specimen. It was not a flint, but an aggregation of fine silica sand that had been converted into compact sandstone by a solution of iron derived from the nail, which had served as a nucleus to the sand that had gradually accumulated around it. The facts described by Kirwan and Knight doubtless admit of the same explanation, the narrators having mistaken a sandstone and modern formation for a genuine flint nodule. When residing at Brighton, I obtained many specimens of recent ironstone from the fishermen who dredged them up from the Bristol Channel. Cannonballs, horseshoes, nails, chains, fragments of bolts, bars, anchors, and so on, formed in the nuclei of these masses, some of which were exceedingly interesting from the variety of shells, zoophytes, and other marine productions promiscuously impacted in the same block of stone. The Imperial Library of Constantinople was believed to be the greatest in the world outside the Vatican. The library, which at one stage consisted of over 100,000 manuscripts, survived for almost 1,000 years before it was supposedly destroyed in the Fourth Crusade of 1204 when Norman Crusaders devastated the city. However, there are rumors that the library survived largely intact and was somehow spirited out of the city to its eventual destination in modern Moscow. It became known as the Library of Ivan III, and some researchers believe it lies there still, in vaults beneath the Kremlin building, waiting to be discovered. Standing on a triangular peninsula between Europe and Asia, modern Istanbul, formerly Constantinople, ancient Byzantium, is the largest city and principal seaport in Turkey. The city's original name, Byzantium, possibly derives from that of Byzas, as leader of the Greeks from the city of Megara, west of Athens, who, according to legend, captured the peninsula from pastoral Thracian tribes and constructed the town around 657 BC. In 196 AD, the Roman Emperor Septimius Severus burned the town for opposing him in a civil war, afterwards rebuilding it and naming it Augusta Antonina in honor of his son. Later, Emperor Constantine wanted to build a new capital of the Roman Empire on the site of ancient Troy, but changed his mind and located his new city at the site of Old Byzantium, claiming in 330 AD that it was a new Rome, Nova Roma. Soon afterwards, however, it was renamed Constantinople after the emperor. The great city would be Christian but governed by Roman law, and adopt Greek as its primary language. Due to its unique geographic location spanning Europe and Asia, it would soon become a melting pot of peoples and cultures. In 337 AD, Constantine died, leaving the empire in confusion, and the question of his successor up in the air. Finally, his son Constantius II defeated his brothers and all other challengers to become the Roman Empire's sole emperor. Constantius II expanded the governmental bureaucracy, adding quaestors, praetors, and even tribunes. According to most historians, he is credited with building the first of three Hagia Sophias, the Church of Holy Wisdom, in 360 AD. The great church was later destroyed by fire in 404 AD, after which it was rebuilt by Theodosius II. It was destroyed and rebuilt again under Justinian in 532 AD. Constantinople was the heart and capital of what became known as the Byzantine Empire, the eastern half of the Roman Empire. The empire survived for 1,000 years after the western half, centered in Rome, had crumbled into various feudal kingdoms, only to fall to Ottoman Turkish attacks in 1453. About 357 AD, Constantius II, concerned about the deterioration of a large collection of early texts written on papyrus rolls, began the formation of what was to become the Imperial Library of Constantinople. He ordered manuscripts, including the Judeo-Christian scriptures copied from papyrus, onto the more permanent medium of parchment or vellum. The person in charge of the library under Constantius II is believed to have been a man named Themestius, who supervised a team of scribes and librarians who copied the texts on papyrus rolls onto parchment or papyrus codices. It is believed by some researchers that this library preserves some of the texts that survived the burning of the Library of Alexandria, though the historical accounts of the various periods of destruction at Alexandrian are not clear on this. The 12th century epitomist Johann Zonarus Relays was quoted as stating that in 475, when the Imperial Library of Constantinople was damaged by fire, contained 120,000 volumes, which suggests that the library grew steadily during the first century after its founding. In fact, the majority of Greek classics which exist today are known through Byzantine copies originating from the Imperial Library of Constantinople. The Theodosian Code informs us that in 372, the Emperor Valens ordered the employment of 7 copyists, 4 for Greek and 3 for Latin texts, and some assistants to maintain and repair the books at the Imperial Library. Thus we know that the library housed both Greek and Latin texts, but not necessarily in separate libraries, as was the practice in Rome. It is known that the library was burnt in the year 473, though ancient sources reported that Constantius II, Themestius, and the scribes working at the library managed to save and recopy many works before they were completely lost to the fire. Some historians believe that part of the collection housed in the library was later obtained by Emperor Charlemagne in the 8th century, though there is no solid evidence to support this. What is beyond doubt is that the Imperial Library is known to have been at least partially destroyed in the Fourth Crusade in 1204, when Norman Crusaders sacked Constantinople, almost completely destroying the city. The Imperial Library was set on fire, probably destroying much of its collections. It is believed that Crusaders may have sold some rare Byzantine manuscripts to Italian buyers. At Constantinople, shortly before the city fell to the Ottoman Turks in 1453, we get a glimpse of what may have been the last remaining part of a great library there, from a Spanish visitor to the city who sought a reading room in the imperial palace. At the entrance to the palace, beneath certain chambers, is an open loggia of marble with stone benches around it, and stones like tables raised on low pillars in front of them, placed end to end. Here are many books and ancient writings and histories, and on one side are gaming boards. The palace that this visitor saw has disappeared, and we don't know if it was part of the Great Library at Constantinople or in a private collection. Zoe Paleologina, who later changed her name to Sophia around 1449, the 7th of April 1503, was a Byzantine princess who became Grand Princess of Moscow as the second wife of Grand Prince Ivan III. Known as Sophia of Byzantium, she was the niece of the last 2 Byzantine emperors, and her marriage was proposed by Pope Paul II in 1469, either in the hope of strengthening the influence of the Catholic Church in Russia or of unifying the Orthodox and Catholic Church. Some researchers believe that when Sophia and her entourage left Constantinople and travelled to Moscow, she carried with her as her dowry some of the treasures of Byzantine, among which were the remains of the Imperial Library. The Vatican and many other wealthy inhabitants of Rome apparently offered to purchase the whole collection, but Ivan III, realizing its value, kept it. But worried about the power of Rome, Ivan had the manuscripts hidden away in a secret location. This location became known as the Vaults of Liberia. Liberia comes from the Latin word liber, meaning book. It is believed to have been located underneath Moscow, possibly in a large tunnel network beneath the Kremlin. The collection was subsequently expanded by Ivan IV the Terrible, who sent his men all over Europe to collect rare folios and manuscripts. After his death in 1584, the library seems to have disappeared without a trace. The earliest reference to the lost library comes from 1518, when scholar and translator Mikhail Tripolis, known as Maximus the Greek, was in Russia and came into contact with Moscow Grand Prince Vasily III, the son of Ivan III. In a meeting between Mikhail and Vasily, it is said that countless multitudes of Greek books were shown to Mikhail by Vasily III. The rest of history, apart from a few lines in European chronicles from the 16th to the 18th centuries, is mostly silent on the subject. However, in the 19th century, an Estonian historian named Christopher von Dabilov claimed to have seen a list of folios from the missing collection, though he never provided proof of this. But the majority of scholars believe that the library of Ivan IV is nothing more than a legend. Even if the library of Ivan the Terrible had existed, it would probably have been destroyed by now, perhaps in one of 3 fires which ravaged Moscow during the 16th and 17th centuries. There are, of course, some researchers who believe that the Kremlin is hiding the existence of the library. Indeed, every few years, believers, apparently acting on leaked secret information, undertake clandestine excavations in the Russian capital in the hope of chancing upon the long-lost library of Ivan IV. There are many examples of technological know-how and advanced engineering in ancient times, and these range from magnificent megalithic structures to intricate designs of musical instruments and even medication. There is perhaps no better place to start when looking at technological achievements of the ancient world than the pyramids of Giza, not least as we still have no real idea just how these massive structures were built, or why. Even when experiments have gone ahead to try to explain these perplexing buildings, all have failed to provide a solid explanation. And as well they might, given that the pyramids are made up of millions of huge stone blocks, each weighing multiple tons. And what's more, the sheer precision with which these stones are being placed only makes their construction all the more mysterious. Whether the truth of just how the pyramids were constructed ever comes to light remains to be seen. For now, though, they remain a complete mystery. Across the Atlantic Ocean on the outskirts of Cusco in Peru lie Inca ruins, some of which are just as perplexing as the pyramids of Giza. In particular, a fort named Sacsayhuamán, which is made up of equally huge stones that weigh around 100 tons each. Furthermore, the precise nature with which these stones are being placed are equally as advanced as the stone placements at Giza. Even more remarkable is the fact that these stones appear to have been treated so they have a smooth, polished surface, something that could only realistically have been achieved in a huge kiln much larger than has ever been known to exist. Much like the pyramids of Giza, there have been many theories put forward to explain how the stones were positioned and treated. None have been able to show conclusively that they are correct, and the fort's construction remains unexplained. If we cross back over the ancient lands of Europe, there is the Antikythera mechanism, which was discovered off the coast of the Greek island of Antikythera in 1901. Upon examination, it appears clear that the device is some kind of advanced mechanical reproduction of the solar system. This device is said to date back to around 200 BC, leaving those who have investigated it completely at a loss as to how such a device was built almost 2,000 years previously. In total, almost 40 separate intermeshing gears are contained within the device, which is entirely accurate in its workings, and is truly a peek into the past and the technological know-how that was clearly present in antiquity. Although it is something that has been well documented between the years of 600 and 1200, a weapon of the Byzantine Empire known as Greek fire still cannot be replicated today. According to the many reports of this deadly weapon, pipes were fitted to the masts of warships, which, when activated, fired a thick fire at enemy ships and soldiers. And what's more, this strange fiery substance was able to continue to burn for some time on the surface of the water. Suddenly, however, at some time around the 1300s, the deadly weapon simply disappears from history. It's not clear why this happened, with some suggestions being that the ingredients required to make this substance became suddenly unavailable, or that the knowledge of how to blend the required ingredients simply became lost as the empire itself weakened. What makes the Lycurgus cup is so intriguing, its remarkable decorations around its side, is that nobody is entirely certain as to what the cup is made from. What is further interesting about the Lycurgus cup is that the glass within it is dichroic, which means that when a light is shone behind it, it shines red. However, shining a light in front of it will make it appear green. What makes this so interesting is that this effect is achieved by changing the structure of gold and silver nanoparticles, something that modern science only managed to achieve in the 1970s. Just how this was achieved in an item thought to date back to Roman times is beyond explanation, although some people have put forward that this could have been completely unintentional and achieved purely by chance. It would appear from the many writings speaking of it that ancient Egyptians and ancient Greeks made use of a drug that was an ancient equivalent of an antidepressant, known as nepenthe. It translates to anti-sorrow and was seemingly given to those who were feeling sorrowful or sad, what we would call in the modern world depressed. Although there is documentation of its use, it's not certain exactly what the drug is, whether it's a single plant or herb, or an ancient combination of different ingredients. Some researchers have suggested such drugs as cannabis or opium to be the true nature of nepenthe. However, both drugs were widely known and used in the ancient world, and we would assume that they would simply be referred to as such. Whether nepenthe contained a mixture of cannabis, opium, and other such drugs remains a mystery. Perhaps one of the strange mysteries from history is that of the Stradivari violin. Widely considered to be the finest violins ever built, the Stradivari family produced these masterful instruments throughout the 17th and 18th centuries. It is thought that around 600 still exist today. However, there is no one who knows just how to make or recreate them, meaning their numbers will continue to dwindle, and it's unlikely an exact replica will ever be reproduced. Although they can't be reproduced, some scientific studies of these instruments suggest that the wood they are made from is particularly dense, which is likely to contribute to their unique sound. Another substance that the modern world has collectively forgotten how to produce is Damascus steel, a particularly hard and strong metal used in the Middle Ages throughout the Middle East. Its ability to be shaped into particularly sharp edges made this metal ideal for making blades for swords and other weaponry. Like the Stradivari violins, although there are plenty of examples of these blades made from Damascus steel in the modern world, the knowledge to make the metal itself has been lost, and despite several attempts to recreate it, all have fallen short. While this knowledge was likely lost as empires fell and demographics changed, there was also likely an element of keeping such knowledge secret, meaning even in the Middle Ages, only a select few would have been privy on how to produce the metal. In 1940 in the United Kingdom, an experiment was set up that is largely referred to as the Oxford electric bell, which involved two brass bells being buried beneath two dry piles and then sealed. This apparent makeshift battery then produces enough power to create an electrical charge that swings a hammer of sorts that chimes the bell. What is particularly amazing about this is that this battery has remained charged ever since and continues to chime the bell today. Scientists are not certain when the charge will run out, if indeed it will, as they don't wish to interrupt this generational experiment by delving beneath the dry pile. They will have to wait until the battery runs out before they can examine it further. Without a doubt, one of the most remarkable technological achievements of the ancient world is Da Vinci's tank, otherwise referred to as Leonardo's fighting vehicle. When we examine the designs and blueprints of this vehicle, it's clear that Da Vinci was light years ahead of his time, both in this design and in general. Perhaps what makes this vehicle even more intriguing is that the gear system appears to have been designed and placed in reverse order. This could be one of the quirks that truly makes Da Vinci a unique and one-off individual. It could, though, particularly if we subscribe to such notions as being able to look into the future, or even time travel, to explain this advanced know-how of some kind of reverse engineering. Indeed, the ancient world remains a mysterious place indeed.